Love is something wonderful, and anyone who has experienced it knows it's the best thing in life, but it has a very important biochemical component. Neuroscientists have been researching the topic of love in the brain for years, exploring what happens when you fall in love, what happens in blind love, what happens in love at first sight, and what happens after being with your spouse or partner for 20 years. What really exists there? Is it love, infatuation, sparks, or attachment? Studies in this area are becoming increasingly interesting. This study focuses a lot on love at first sight, which neuroscientists have observed extensively. They have even scanned brains to understand what it's about. Love at first sight is that part of sexual attraction where suddenly it's so intense that your entire brain clouds and that person becomes your life. I believe little in the future of such a relationship because if all the rational part hasn't been discussed, when the ecstasy of emotion subsides, you'll find yourself with a person you might not truly know. However, I also know of 2 cases nearby where love at first sight worked out for them. So when something has worked, I can't deny it. I say maybe it does exist, and there's some mechanism we still don't understand. I think it also has a lot to do with knowing what you're looking for and suddenly finding a whole nest of it, like in a constellation. My mother once told me that when you're clear about what you want, there's no doubt, and suddenly everything comes together, and it seems that person is the one for you. If you can fight for it and work on it, it can turn out well. One of the most important things being discussed is that initial phase of falling in love, which researchers say lasts approximately, but you'll see, 17 months. It's interesting because during that initial phase of infatuation, a series of substances are activated in the brain, mainly oxytocin and serotonin. Serotonin levels decrease, making you more prone to obsessions. You become obsessed with the person. You work with serotonin-related drugs. Well, it seems that during the infatuation phase, serotonin decreases and oxytocin, the hormone related to attachment, affection, and trust, increases. In that first phase, when you meet someone, you transition from excitement, euphoria, joy, and enthusiasm to a phase of calm, tranquility, and peace after months or years. Both phases have a physiological basis, but that calm phase that occurs when people have been with their partners for many years not only depends on biochemistry, but also on the ability to have the will to work on the relationship. Moreover, during that infatuation phase, anyone who has fallen in love knows that at that moment, when you're hooked on someone, you overlook certain things that later surprise you. This is because the prefrontal cortex, the area in front of the brain responsible for planning, reasoning, and judgment, becomes deactivated during infatuation. You are unable to see flaws. You only focus on what you like. This is powered by dopamine. When you're in the first phase, what matters is living in that passionate moment, and you don't care about the flaws in your partner's family or the money or work issues. At that moment, all of that becomes less important. One of the crucial things is that when you start off with the most rational approach possible, the development of the relationship is much better. If you overlook or pass over all those basic issues at the beginning, when that phase ends and the prefrontal cortex reactivates and you are able to reason again, thousands of problems start to arise. Cohabitation, children, their education, relationships with extended family, managing finances, free time. It would be impossible for the body to endure the infatuation phase throughout life. It turns into a situation where you're not eating, constantly checking your phone to see if they've replied, imagining scenarios, becoming obsessed. In fact, the reward system akin to that of drugs gets activated. However, with drugs, the substance that enters is external and harms the body significantly, whereas in this case, there's no external substance. Therefore, love is indeed very good for health. It might make you suffer immensely if things go wrong, yet it has several reward systems. How does the reward system work? If you have a problem with alcohol, for example, you keep thinking about when you'll drink. when you'll go to the bar, when you'll meet friends. You spend the whole day scheming. When you finally drink, you feel a high, but then you crash when the reward system fades. In love, it's when you're going to see them, where you'll meet, what you'll wear. It enters an obsessive field. This first phase transitions into the second, the phase of attachment, bonding, stability, and balance. Here, what's required above all is a physiological balance, meaning there must be a good hormonal balance, but most importantly, the capacity for willpower. You can set goals intelligently. If you solely rely on feelings, if you depend only on saying, "I feel this," since feelings fluctuate, they can be absent. For instance, consider the example of children. You can adopt children, love them intensely, but one morning you might wake up and not stand your child. That doesn't mean you kick them out of the house. It just means you recognize there are times when your child is more difficult to deal with, and you're less tolerant. But that doesn't equate to a rupture. Obviously, romantic relationships are different from parent-child relationships, but it's important to understand that feelings and emotions change, and you can make significant life decisions based on a pattern of feelings and emotions. If you want to always have that spark of infatuation, you have to accept that you'll have to change partners constantly to maintain those butterflies, that rush of dopamine, serotonin, epinephrine, as we discussed earlier. It's logical for this to happen. It often occurs in people whose upbringing, family history, and early loves greatly influence how they'll connect with others. For example, how they were loved at the beginning, during adolescence. Even their first sexual experiences greatly shape how they'll bond, because sexual relationships have a significant role in love. And let's not forget the hormones that activate during those times, influencing our capacity to love. Many times, we have childhood circuits that are quite polluted. If we had an authoritarian, sick, or alcoholic parent, it affects us greatly. The same goes for women with overbearing, overly protective mothers or parents who always fought and yelled at home. Our brain seeks comfort and familiarity based on these experiences. It's like being in familiar territory, but with a type of partner that isn't right for me. However, my brain detects it as a familiar zone. It's not necessarily good for me, but because my brain perceives it as a known and safe area, someone might say, "What bad luck, my father was an alcoholic, and I end up marrying an alcoholic." But how is it possible to associate with that world after having associated it with something negative? It's because the brain seeks that familiarity when it detects something similar to that childhood zone that brings us comfort. It approaches it. And that's why we repeat patterns closely related to our attachment figures, such as our parents or first partners. People may reunite with their high school sweetheart and say, "Hey, I felt something again." It's because that time got imprinted, that relationship got idealized. Those were very important moments, and one can easily get hooked again. I always say, having self-awareness about what suits you well in life as a partner requires a deep understanding of oneself. For example, I have a patient in my practice who lives with her partner. They're committed, but now, after not just 17 months but 23 years, she wants to have a child, and he says, "I already told you I didn't want kids." She responds with, "Well, I thought..." Something as crucial as the topic of children is essential to consider if you want to succeed in a relationship. It's about knowing what you're looking for, because when that infatuation phase arrives, since you can't reason as fluidly, it's better to know what you've already ruled out. Each person must know what they're seeking, what their priorities are, for the relationship to work. This filters out a myriad of things you can't even imagine. And when you see something coming that you're attracted to, recognizing, "This is what usually appeals to me, but I know it's not good for me," is a sign of immense maturity. Being able to identify what attracts you is an echo of our sexual desires. Some like rogues, while others prefer good people. Sometimes knowing that I need to break a vicious circle where I always seek a pattern that doesn't suit me is crucial. Each case is unique, but the important thing is to know what your partner likes, what you like, and find common ground in making decisions together about education, money, work, travel, leisure, and difficult topics. Because later, the pain comes. There's no couple that doesn't go through something significant. Suffering accompanies us. I always repeat a phrase: I don't know of a life without sufferings, battles, and wounds. As a psychiatrist, I tend to stay positive in my message, but I deal with listening to people's lives who suffer greatly and struggle to manage independently. It's true that suffering can cause a lot of harm, but it's also true that when a couple's foundations are healthy, when the pillars are solid, during those tough moments, some people are brought closer together. I'm thinking, for example, of the illness or death of a child, which can be experienced as a uniting factor if the relationship is well established and solid. Despite the immense pain, it can make them stronger. If there's a lack of communication or differing systems in the relationship, then problems like financial issues or illness become even more challenging to manage. Currently, with the prevalence of illness in society, as many of us have a sick family member, managing illness can be a severe strain on a relationship. One must acknowledge that during such times, the relationship may need to take a back seat for a while without neglecting the details. When you start neglecting the details of living together, it worsens the entire relationship. I also want to mention that when you have a good relationship with your partner and you experience pain and suffering, it's kind of the best antidote to death and illness. Suffering is having a good system of love by your side, not just the love of a partner, but the love of your siblings, parents, and friends. I mean, feeling loved. That's where a hormone comes into play that is very attentive to all of this. It mitigates the effects of pain and stress on the brain and the body.